All righty. Sounds like we are rolling. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming in today. I know a lot of you are coming in fresh from Explore Las Vegas. Hopefully, everybody had a fantastic time looking at some of the announcements that happened and reviews of the sessions. And this was definitely a good year. I am not disappointed to see some of the things that happened. Looks like it was fantastic. Um, on the vein of Explore, coming to you in 2025, even now and moving all the way up into next year, we're doing Explore on tour. I know a lot of you that go back a bit remember we used to do Explore in Barcelona, which was fantastic, but we've now moved on to a new format, which is going to allow us to keep the party going in specific geos. So hopefully folks don't have to travel as much and can enjoy something a little bit closer to home. We've got Mumbai's up next, coming up in September 16th, just around the corner. And then London, September 17th and 18th. And I've heard rumors that London may actually be sold out already, which is amazing, fantastic. I don't know if we're going to expand the program on that or offer more passes or what, but get all the getting's good if you're planning on going to London.
Yeah.
There may still be some slots available, and then of course we've got additional geos going on all over the place, up through and into next year. So we'll be moving and moving. So with that, speaking of Explore, hot off the presses, fresh home from Explore Las Vegas. Hopefully everybody came back in one piece. We've got Pete Fletcher and Rick Walsworth. How you doing, gentlemen?
Doing really
Buenos
well.
dias.
Thanks. Yes, very good.
Fantastic. And it sounds like you're gonna be sharing some VCF specific content today that get a little deep dive on some of the things that are going on for those who missed it, share some additional information for everybody. And yeah, I think we're ready to rock and roll. I got nothing else here. Looks like the room's just about full, so you guys can go ahead and take it away.
Great. I appreciate that. And welcome to everybody that's joined. My name is Rick Walsworth. I'm the Director of Product Marketing within the VCF division. And I'm joined by Pete Fletcher, Senior Product Marketing Engineer from the VCF division as well as what we're going to do today from an agenda standpoint is, we're going to look specifically at, what were some of the key takeaways from Explore 2025. Obviously, there was a lot of news that came out of the event itself, but Pete and I just wanted to provide a quick recap of what that is. And then we're going to jump right into, the core objective of the session here, which is really around use cases and business outcomes, right? So we'll start talking about what are some of the business outcomes that our customers are achieving with private cloud. We'll go specifically into some of the use cases and provide details on customer examples. And then what Pete's going to do is Pete's actually going to step into how do you get to VCF 9.0, right? What are the steps to be able to go there? What are some of the considerations? What are some of the drivers behind that? And then we'll also provide a quick summary of this. Keep in mind that, in addition to monitoring chat, we will be looking at Q&A. And as we go through this, we want to keep it very interactive. So as you have questions, please use the Q&A portion of the webcast to be able to provide your questions. We'll try to answer those in real time. And at the end, we intend to have some time. So we'd like to be able to bring some of those questions live so that we can be much more interactive in terms of how we address any questions that you might have. All right, Pete, let's get started. So,
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun last week. Obviously, just a whirlwind of activity. We spend better part of a year getting ready for the Explore, and then in 3 days, it's like it's a blur. It's
Oh yeah.
over. But certainly, I think at the event itself, the breakouts were amazing. I think the attendance and the show to me just felt there's a lot more energy at the event this year. What about you? What did you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The prep is crazy. Everybody is trying their best to get there. And then by the time we get there, it's like it's over in 5 minutes. But
Yeah.
it was amazing. Obviously we'll talk a little bit more about the announcements, but just the show vibe in general for me, especially compared to last year, was night and day. I mean, it was I felt like last year everybody was talking about like, hey, what's going on with Broadcom? VMware, where, like, what about licensing and what is this? It was a very different vibe last year. This year,
Yeah.
everybody was focused on tech, and it was
Yeah.
super. The energy was high.
Well, and I think to that point, what I observed was that people came here trying to solve problems, right?
Yeah.
The folks that I engaged with, the customers that I talked to, the partners that I worked with, they were really trying to address very specific problems. So they came, many of them brought their teams out across there, and some of the customer meetings I had, obviously they want to hear about the roadmap, they want to hear about the innovation and some of the capabilities that were announced at the show, but they're also trying to figure out how do they address their core initiatives and how can they kind of take those initiatives to the next stage.
Yeah, and then from the Virtually Speaking podcast perspective, which is a podcast that myself and John Nicholson host, we had about 30 or so interviews there that were really compelling. We spoke to analysts, we spoke to execs, we spoke to partners, customers, and had some really good times. We even had an interview in an autonomous car, which was a lot of fun. We drove around the city in this autonomous car talking about AI, and my wife said I was crazy for getting in the car, but hey, I'm a fan for tech, so it was fun. We had a good time, but I think
Yeah.
nothing was more fun than actually seeing all of the announcements at general session. So maybe we
Yeah,
can go to
no,
that.
I love to see the activity there, and again, I'm jealous. You guys got to do a podcast from inside of autonomous car. If you're interested, definitely check that out on YouTube. It's a great watch and a great podcast live from a
Yeah,
from an autonomous Zoox car. So good
yeah.
advertising for them.
Link in the chat.
Yeah, awesome. So the other thing we wanted to do is really kind of just recap some of the big news. I mean, there was a lot of news that came out of the event, but if I had to summarize in kind of three core categories, it fits into delivering infrastructure at the speed of the developer, which is a big theme out across there, and obviously our persona has always been that admin persona, the VI admin or the cloud admin now. But we are obviously opening much more up to the developer and the platform teams that are essentially supporting developers as part of that. Private AI as a service was the second big theme that came across there. Some big news around that. And then cyber resilient data, right? As cyber threats become more relevant out across there. And if I'm to break each of these down, Pete, if you look at the infrastructure of the speed of the developer, some of the key takeaways from that one was the ability to essentially now have a vSAN-based native S3 object support within that, so that now essentially if I'm bringing cloud native applications in, I can leverage that native S3 support. We have Istio now, Service Mesh is actually included within the VCF BOM. And then one of the bigger announcements, and actually something certainly that I had a lot of conversations with customers around, was the ability to be able to integrate with Canonical. And their chiseled container support for Ubuntu provides now essentially a full stack capability that provides support for the developers that are deploying out across there.
Yeah, the Canonical was a big one for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I only knew them from Ubuntu, so it was interesting to see, how they're basically one of the main operating systems for cloud, and just seeing them join with VCF was pretty powerful. Knowing that you have a full support at the VCF level that will also support all of the Canonical stuff. Just one throat to choke, as they say. But
Yeah.
really cool partnership.
And then private AI obviously has been a big conversation, since it was announced a couple of years ago, went GA last year, and now we're actually talking about real customer deployments on this private AI. And to me, the big news, and certainly, when Chris Wolf announced this on stage, almost got a standing ovation from the audience, was the fact that private AI is now included as a native component within VCF. So I no longer have to add it as an add-on service. It's now included as part of the VCF deployment. It comes along with a whole new set of private AI services that go with it. And we also announced new integrations with NVIDIA and their Blackwell series of compute GPUs, as well as AMD, bringing them in. So now you have choices in terms of what platforms you can use from a GPU standpoint within the VCF private AI.
Yeah, and even with AMD, like you don't even have to use a GPU, right? So you can actually leverage
Yep.
compute. So really, it extends the amount of options that are available for AI use cases. And having VCF private AI as the core offering. I spoke to some partners that were saying a lot of their customers were hesitant initially for taking advantage of the AI, but once it becomes part of the core services, they say this is just basically the gates are open now. So now they can really start to take advantage of all these different use cases for AI. So many of them anyway. We can talk for days about the different use cases I heard this past week, from sports to medicine to support, like so many different use cases for AI. It's crazy.
Well, and to me, the strategy is more about trying to get adoption of it rather than trying to monetize it, right? And that was the feedback I got directly from customers, is that we should have offered this AI as part of our core platform from the beginning, right? When we announced it, it should have been part of the core platform. So I totally agree there. And then cyber resilience is certainly a theme that we continue to hear a lot of discussion about, because customers are seeing that, as these cyber threats do become much more relevant and much more prevalent within the environment, you want to be able to make sure that you have the ability to not only ensure that you're compliant against that, but also have a recovery mechanism that's very tightly tied into it. So what we've done is we brought in some of our compliance capabilities that have been built natively in the platform. We also brought in Salt, right? So Salt is something that's been kind of floating around within the VMware technology ecosystem for some time, but now it's really found a home. And what, to me, the most impactful part of that announcement was the fact that now I can actually use Salt as a way to ensure that once I configure my systems, if those configurations start to go out of drift, Salt provides remediation to be able to bring it back in. So integration of Salt within the cyber resilient SKU, to me, makes a lot of sense. And I think we're going to get a lot of customers that are going to see some benefit from that. Okay, cool. Let's jump into it. So enough of an overview for Explore. Again, great event. And by the way, big news. They did announce Explore for 2026. So that was a big question that I got. There was, I think, this air of secrecy around it. But before the show closed, they did announce that we will be there in August of 2026. So looking forward to that. Okay. So let's jump right into it. And when we talk with customers and talk with partners about, private cloud, what are the business outcomes they're trying to achieve with it? It really falls in my mind, three core buckets, right? And when you listen to customers, the requirements that you hear and some of the challenges that they face as part of that really comes around, how do I increase my revenue streams? How do I reduce risk? And how do I lower cost, right? Make money, reduce risk, save money. It's pretty simple. In the increased revenue side, it's really the ability to be able to have the organization respond more quickly to market conditions. And in order to do so, you need infrastructure that is really flexible, right? That's what made cloud, when cloud rolled out 10, 15 years ago, it was the agility that people wanted to be able to move to. Well, now what we're doing is we're bringing that agility back on-prem and extending it out across through cloud endpoints, through our hyperscalers and any of our CSPs. I can run it at edge, but all it does is it really enables faster business innovation. I can really now start to drive and focus on innovating for new revenue streams and make better and more informed decisions about what choices do I make going forward. And I need data in order to do that. We provide that as part of the VCF platform. Reduce risk, obviously, we just talked a lot about cyber compliance and cyber recovery, but you want to be able to make sure that you can mitigate issues before they become a bigger problem and impact customer deployments. You want to be able to make sure that you ensure that you have compliance and security as part of the platform, but more importantly, minimize downtime, right? So if something does happen, let's minimize the amount of time that I have to actually take those systems offline before I can bring them back in, and ensure that I have recovery mechanisms, not only for traditional disasters, right? Could be weather event, could be, natural disasters, or it could be man-made. And cyber threats and certainly ransomware is becoming a bigger issue. And so now, by integrating a lot of these capabilities into a common workflow around VMware Live Recovery, we now have the ability to be able to provide very fast recovery. And then finally, lower costs, right? And we've got these very detailed models we built in through our TCO optimization that really show how you can improve infrastructure costs as compared to traditional three-tier infrastructure, but also compared to public cloud. How do we reduce waste, right? if indeed I'm building and destroying clusters, how do I take those unused resources, clean them up, and now have them available to be able to make sure that I can right-size infrastructure? But what it does is it provides better cost predictability. I have much more visibility, much more awareness of what I'm spending. So I can also do things like chargeback. Gives me the ability to be able to, provide showback and chargeback capabilities, leveraging some of the automation capabilities we build natively into the platform. But when you look at this, private cloud is not a location, right? And that's typically the first conversation I have with most customers and the analysts and partners out across there. They always think about private cloud as being on premises, and it's a lot more than that. It's the ability to be able to essentially deploy an operating model. And some of the core characteristics you need to make that operating model work is you want to be able to leverage that software-defined infrastructure, right? So I want the ability to be able to essentially take all of the core elements of my infrastructure building blocks: compute, storage, networking, security, data protection, run it under a software-defined infrastructure. So now I have the ability to be much more agile in how I respond to what the market's demanding. Self-service and automation, right? Big theme. You've seen this for the past couple of years. We are now taking this to the next level. Certainly VCF 9.0 delivered a whole new level of automation and self-service that we could not do before. Be able to work in any workload environment. So whether it be traditional VMs where I'm using, my databases, my Oracle, my SQL, my NoSQL systems, or containers as a first-class citizen within a VMware environment, as well as now by bringing private AI into VCF, AI fits right up there as well. So whether I'm running VMs, containers, or AI, or a combination of all these together to be able to deploy these systems, I can now be much more agnostic to supporting these out across the different workload domains in a VCF environment. I can also be location agnostic. So whether I'm running on-prem, I'm running at the edge, or in any of our CSP or hyperscaler environments, that experience is the same. So if I'm a user or a consumer of the infrastructure, regardless of where I'm accessing the data, that experience is the same. Self-service, exactly the same. Operations is the same. The underlying infrastructure changes, but that experience that the customer has should not change. And likewise for security and governance. As I build my compliance, that compliance should be consistent. The resilience should be consistent, regardless of whether I'm deploying on-prem or deploying out in any of our partner clouds. And this is a conversation, Pete, that we typically have a lot when we're talking with customers about it. It's a lot more than just tech. It's all about how does my organization, how have I transformed my people, my processes, my tools to be able to fit very effectively out across there. And there's typically three areas that we talk with customers on this about, is around, does your org structure match the platform operations, right? This is the same conversations people had when they started going to public cloud, is that I may need to reorient my organization to be able to fit those specific requirements. Governance.
I was going to say, I spoke to a couple of customers at Explore about this specifically, and they said, like when we were talking about, how did they prepare to go to VCF 9, one of the things they said was they literally had to change their organization a little bit, because it's one thing to have software that's fully unified and has everything in one interface and everything works together. But if your teams are not organized and they are not also aggregated and consolidated, it can be a little bit challenging to have to fight different wars with networking teams or fight, so there was a bit of a reorganization from a people perspective as well, compared to just the software.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the other things that we certainly see as customers are deploying these systems out there, and especially as they're looking to provide self-service, is you want to be able to maintain that governance, right? You want to be able to ensure that you've got the ability to allow the developers to innovate, to be creative, and to do that. But you also want to be able to provide the guardrails so that they don't hurt themselves or hurt the organization as they're trying to expand these services and deploy, this self-service framework. Governance becomes more important as you're doing that. And then, I think it's also important so that you understand kind of the strategic elements of what's happening, is that what's that common understanding? What's the why behind it? And one of the things that I think most the companies that do this well are those companies that essentially provide alignment of the workloads, right? So they're looking at, I have my traditional applications, I have my cloud native applications, I now I have my AI applications that I'm in there. How am I building the infrastructure to be able to support that? But also each of those has unique requirements around compliance and operational consistency. Sovereignty becomes a big challenge, especially when you look in Europe and some of the requirements that are happening in Europe and other parts of the world. Data sovereignty now becomes a bigger requirement. So it's important to do that upfront planning. And one of the comments that came from a customer last week is that spend more time listening to the architects and less time speaking and listening to the project managers that are just trying to push a schedule down there. So to me, I thought that was a very astute observation, but it does point to you need to rethink, how your people, process, and tools also support the transformation. And so this leads us into VCF 9.0. Again, shipping now we're going almost on 3 months since it went GA, and we're absolutely seeing great traction, customers that are moving to it. We ran a beta program with VCF 9 for the first time in the history of VMware Cloud Foundation, which was awesome because it gave us the ability to be able to get early access for customers to be able to get this. We were able to get early feedback, and through the cycles of beta, we actually continued to sharpen the edge, making sure that the product addressed some of the core requirements of not only the cloud admins, which are our core personas, but also fit very nicely with some of the consumers and the platform teams that are deploying this out at scale. And if you look at it, you're going to the business outcomes, again, because we're trying to keep this focused on what's the business trying to deliver. A lot of what we're hearing from customers through the beta as well as through the early deployments is they're improving their operational efficiency, leveraging a lot of the fleet management capabilities and the automation that's built into VCF 9.0. Cost control, right? And you get much better visibility. But as I mentioned, you can also do things such as showback. So if you have multiple consumers within your environment working in a multi-tenant environment, I have the ability to be able to provide very detailed cost breakdowns of what they're consuming and what that means from a cost standpoint within the internal organization, and the ability to be able to chargeback. So we have companies that are absolutely using chargeback as a mechanism to be able to do some cost recovery from the IT standpoint back to the different business units, much like a cloud provider would do today. Security, right? So security and resilience, that is it is not a checkbox item. This is absolutely a must-have in these environments because most of these security and recovery conversations are happening at the C-suite, right? These are typically board-level conversations because it only takes one outage or one penetration of your environment to totally ruin a company's reputation, not only to mention their customer data, right? So strengthening security is a big part of what customers are doing. And then cloud portability, right? The ability to be able to essentially take my entitlements from my on-premises deployment that I have with VCF today and moving that to any of our CSPs or to any of our hyperscalers becomes a stronger environment. Okay, let's shift gears now. I want to start to get very tactical and start to talk about some of the use cases, and then we're going to cite some specific customer examples that fit across these different use cases. So you may have seen a version of this slide in the past, but this is really about what are the core business initiatives that companies are trying to accomplish around modernization of my infrastructure, modernization of my applications, and modernization of my security as part of it. And these are all very cohesive. These work in very, very nicely. And regardless of the vertical industry or where a company is located, you can fit your use cases and the problems you're trying to solve within the brackets that fall within this. And typically when you talk about infrastructure modernization, this is where most of our customers start, right? This is the ability to be able to essentially stand up private cloud infrastructure and build and deploy private cloud on-prem, optimize that infrastructure, and then extend that out to the edge or extend it out to any of our partner clouds, whether it be a CSP or a hyperscaler. On the app modernization, so this is where we start to bring in our partner organizations, whether it be a development team that's developing net new applications, whether it be a line of business, or it could be a actual tenant that you are serving in a multi-tenant environment. And within this, it's important to be able to ensure that you've got a automation platform that does provide the ability to self-serve, so that now the developers and the platform teams can self-service and deliver infrastructure as a service, and then now start to layer in a whole new set of applications right on top of that. Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes becomes a core construct for deploying container-based applications within this. We now have embedded within VCF all of the Kubernetes tools, the runtime, and the services that get wrapped around it to be able to deploy these container-based applications at scale. And likewise, by bringing private AI now as a core construct within the VCF stack, we now have the ability to deploy both predictive and generative AI solutions using private AI, ensuring that your data is always protected. On the security modernization, right? Security, as I mentioned before, is a C-level conversation. If something goes wrong on the security front, I guarantee you will have a very difficult conversation with your CISO, your CIO, and potentially even the board as part of it. So you want to make sure you do not cut corners when it comes to security modernization. And that typically falls around, what am I doing to ensure compliance within my own regulatory framework? What am I doing to ensure that I've hardened my infrastructure, both from the standpoint of preventing intrusions, but also detecting intrusions and lateral incursions, right? So lateral security is certainly a piece of technology that is, relatively new, but what it does is it looks for those dormant malwares that sit there and essentially can start to migrate laterally within the network. We have technology within our vDefend portfolio that provides both intrusion detection and prevention as part of this. And in the unlikely event that something does get through and something does happen, you now have recovery mechanisms to be able to recover from ransomware and other disasters as part of this. So this is kind of the framework that we use to be able to describe that. But what I'm going to do now is kind of walk through what are some of the capabilities that we have as part of this, to be able to make sure that you understand kind of where this fits within the overall infrastructure modernization. So when I'm talking about building and deploying, private cloud infrastructure, this is really what does it take to be able to stand up my day zero operations? And when I speak of day zero, this is my initial deployment, right? So what does it take to deploy out of the gate? So we have installers that help automate a lot of that take it down from what used to take days to do this. Now we can actually complete this within a matter of hours. Fleet management, right? So I want to be able to make sure that as I'm deploying a large fleet of globally distributed infrastructure, that I have the ability to be able to manage that. And then also, how can I optimize all this infrastructure to be able to make sure that I can support existing environments, essentially provide the ability to import existing environments so that I can optimize it for scale. On the operations standpoint, we look at things like automation. Where can we automate to be able to essentially take and drive more efficiency? How can I drive more operations and fleet management? And then how can I leverage some of the latest capabilities we delivered in 9.0? Memory tiering, global deduplication, enhanced data paths. These are all capabilities, but you want to be able to make sure you have visibility of it. So I want to be able to ensure that I have dashboards where I can essentially monitor that. And then as I need to optimize, give the admins the tools they need to be able to optimize this out across there. And then finally, we realize that most deployments actually extend beyond the confines of the core data center. So how do I run out to edge and support essentially the ability to support edge requirements from a small single node edge deployment out to a widely dispersed edge deployment? Seamless workload migration using tools such as VCF Operations HCX, which is an awesome tool in terms of that. And then how can I leverage license portability as a way to be able to deploy out across there? And so within each of these, I want to actually bring forward a customer case study as part of this. And anyone that was at Explore last week or saw any of the recordings from the Explore sessions, Audi was very prevalent there. Audi had their entire team there. They were obviously mentioned on the big stage, but they participated in a number of breakouts and also had a number of customer meetings. And the Audi story is awesome because what they've done is they've actually taken their technology that they use for robotics within the show, within their factory floor. they've had automation on it, but they use these devices called PLCs, which are essentially programmable logic controllers. And what these PLCs do is they're essentially computers that are purpose-built but hardware defined to be able to control these robots. And you can imagine all of the different operations that happen on a factory floor, and having to essentially use a hardware-based system on it becomes very problematic. There are problems where, essentially within these industrial PCs and the PLCs, by virtualizing this, they've actually taken a lot of the maintenance headache out of it. But what they've done is they've actually taken that entire PLC framework, virtualized it underneath the VMware Cloud Foundation, and now have the ability to be able to deploy at scale, due to the, save costs as part of that as well. They've improved their operational efficiency, because they think about it, right? If I have to take a factory floor line down, that means I'm not building cars. And even, 20 minutes of downtime that we show here, that impacts their, factory efficiency. So by providing virtual PLCs and by providing VMware Cloud Foundation as a way to be able to do this, that Audi story, I think, resonates with a lot of companies that are looking at automation as a way to scale their footprint. Application modernization. So as we now start to move to applications, right, it's the ability to be able to deploy self-service so that I can essentially now start to extend beyond just traditional VMs to start to move into containers and Kubernetes as a framework, and certainly move into AI as well. So as we look at Kubernetes, it's the ability to have a complete Kubernetes ecosystem built into VCF. So everything from the core runtime to all of the services. I now have service mesh through Istio that's included within it, and it provides all of the security and observability capabilities, as well as that Kubernetes runtime that is upstream compliant with CNCF as we deploy those out there. But most importantly is the ability now to be able to include private AI as a core construct within VCF. So leverages, the work obviously we've done with NVIDIA, but now extends out into the AMD frameworks as well. And when we think about customer deployments here, United States Senate Federal Credit Union, FCU, was actually one of the early adopters of our private AI foundation. And what they found is that they can actually now deliver applications to their customers much faster. They've been able to tighten up the security and privacy of their members' sensitive data, because there's a lot of PII that's included within this. But they've also improved their member support using private AI on top of VMware Cloud Foundation as a way to be able to deploy these at scale. Okay, security. And as I mentioned, security is no longer a bolt-on or an afterthought. It is something that is literally embedded within the core of the VCF structure. We have security built into every layer. So if you look at vSphere, you look at vSAN, you look at NSX, these are all inherently secure, but then we've also tightened up all of the integration that we provide within the VCF platform to be able to ensure that any potential security threats are not only addressed at that point, but we can also leverage some of the vDefend tools as a way to look at intrusion detection and prevention, and be able to use network detection and response powered by AI and machine learning as a way to be able to essentially detect and respond to potential issues that come up in there. And then again, as in the unlikely event that something happens, now you have the ability to leverage our recovery mechanisms, either through VLR live recovery, or from a disaster recovery standpoint, to be able to provide not only that resilience, but also leverage the deep snapshots that are provided by vSAN to be able to support these environments. And again, customer case study, right? So Dubai Airport's very, very security minded as part of that, given where they're geographically located. Within that, they've actually been able to take all of their operations, both including security as well as the compute, storage, and networking, and unify all of the operations, provide a single dashboard that does that. Their security policy enforcement is very fine-grained. They've leveraged, obviously the vDefend capabilities as a way to be able to provide the advanced threat protection, but also the prevention as part of that. And what they've been able to do since 2016, reduce 7,800 tons of carbon emissions. So to me, that's, showing that from an ecology standpoint, they are also providing the capabilities to be able to essentially reduce their carbon footprint as part of this. So these are all great stories, but again, a lot of the questions we get is, how do I get there? So I'm now going to hand off to Pete and allow him to kind of walk us through, how do you get to VCF 9 as part of this?
Yeah, Rick, that was great, man. It was funny. I actually had a chance to talk to the U.S. Senate Federal Credit Union as well, and on virtually speaking, and they were just telling us that obviously security is a huge concern for them because people apparently want to impersonate senators or hack their system. So yeah, they're even looking at ways to use AI for fraud detection, and so really cool use cases that you shared, and really great customer stories as well. But like you said, how do we actually get to VCF 9? There's a couple of different paths, and let's see if I know how to advance slides. Here we go. Yeah. Yeah, so every customer is at a different stage in their private cloud journey, right? Some are still running basic vSphere. Some folks have got vSphere plus vSAN, maybe vSphere plus a combination, whether it's NSX or maybe even automation. And that's fine because there's really no single starting point for VCF 9. You don't have to be at a specific configuration to get there. Everybody's in a different spot. VCF 9 is designed to meet you where you are. Whether you're modernizing your complete infrastructure, or whether you're focusing at tightening security like USSFC, or if you're preparing for AI and hybrid cloud. I mean, VCF helps you take that next step faster and certainly with less risk. Ultimately, it's all about value realization, turning all of your investments in VCF into measurable business outcomes, no matter where you begin. So let's talk about what it looks like from our customers, from what we've seen. So we did some internal studies before we actually built VCF 9. We took a look at all of our customers to see what they're actually deploying, on current day, and we were able to summarize what the most common deployment combinations that exist out there, and this information was passed on to our engineering teams. But the results first, right? So the majority of our customers are using vSphere, obviously, and with the various combinations, with operations, with vSphere with vSAN, vSphere with just NSX. vSphere with automation, but then also some version of VCF, previous versions. And so a lot of different environments running this, and engineering took this information to apply to making the design of VCF 9, making sure that the deployment was going to be certainly more simple, more streamlined, and to make sure that they're meeting all of our customers where they are, to make sure that the transition path is a lot smoother. So that was the goal of that. And these are the most common deployments that we're seeing. And let me see if I can here we go. Okay, so at a high level, there are three main paths we see to get to VCF 9. Now, the greenfield deployment, if you're starting fresh, it's going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to use the VCF installer. It's got embedded pre-checks and a guided setup. And it's going to build the full stack for you from day zero. And then after you've got it completely stood up, you've got VCF automation and VCF operations consoles that are going to take over from there. You can start building out your workload domains and do all the automation for you for your net new private cloud builds. So this clearly is a very straightforward approach for those that are doing greenfield deployment. But certainly the most common scenario that we see are customers that are converting from previous versions of whether it's vSphere or, as I mentioned, vSphere with vSAN, vSphere with NSX. So if you're already running those building blocks, the VCF installer now supports converting your standalone vSphere cluster into a VCF managed environment. So it's a fast path to unifying your operations, your security, and your lifecycle inside of the VCF control plane. But the good news is you don't have to re-architect it to get there. So this will ingest that information. There's no migration involved. It's an ingest, and then from that point forward, you can start building out your workload domains. Now, the other common scenario that we see, we do have customers that had installed VCF previous versions of VCF. So they've got the full stack already using VCF 5.2, for example. The minimum supported version for upgrading to 9, which is 5.2. Right, so the upgrade to 9, it's pretty simple. It's an in-place upgrade, and it's completely automated through SDDC Manager. So you get access to all the new features from vSAN, ESA, from GPU services and the new Ops console. All of this with minimal interruption for sure. So no matter where you're starting, whether it's a new deployment, whether it's a migration or an upgrade, VCF 9 gives you a clear, simplified path to a modern private cloud. Now, there are some details that we need to focus on specifically to getting ready, the readiness guide, if you will. So if you are on a previous version of VCF, whether it's 3.x or 4.x, in order to get to 9, you're going to have to get to a minimum of VCF 5.x. Once you get to VCF 5.x, then then you're ready for your in-place upgrade, and then it's a straight shot to VCF 9. Similarly, if you're using vSphere versions less than 8, or vSAN, ARIA, for example, versions less than 8, you're going to have to get to a minimum of 8. And if you're using NSX versions older than 4, then you're going to have to get to a minimum of NSX version 4. Once you get to those versions, then you're set for your in-place upgrade to VCF 9. Now, the big thing to call out here, obviously, the end of support for customers for vSphere 7 is October 2nd, 2025. So that's coming up pretty quick. So if you are considering an upgrade, and you're looking at that support, these are the options that you've got. So you're going to want to make sure you take advantage of that, so you can still be supported and then get upgraded to VCF 9. Now, to help guide you through those transitions, there's several options. For example, if you reach out to your account team, we have a thing called a readiness checklist, a customer readiness checklist, and our teams will work with you and to ensure that your environment is ready for the upgrade. Can walk through all the steps, show you what's supported, what's not supported, and let you know sort of what it's going to look like. Based on all of the information from the deployment, there's been several teams that have been working on assessments and design guides to show you exactly what it looks like to go through the upgrade. So there's plenty of documentation there as well. But one of the recurring themes I heard at Explore this year, matter of fact, it was one of them we heard from was from the USS, the Federal Credit Union, was that the upgrade was seamless for them, for sure. The migration, it's complex in the sense that there's a lot of moving parts, but it was seamless. And it was non-disruptive for their organization, but they were very thankful that they had the professional services to work with for the planning, but also for the deployment. So it was something, there's a lot of different ways to engage with professional services, different ways to do it, regardless of where you are in your journey. But yeah, these people have. There several customers that I spoke to have said that they really were sharing praises of the professional cloud services because that helped them get to this migration, get to 9 much faster. And then the other thing for VCF customers, there's some great training out there from third-party vendors for sure. But the good news is they've announced, I think Rick, they announced this at Explore, but there's now some free training. So there's a lot of learning. And this is the training that we share for internal teams as well as external. So if you're a VCF customer, you're moving to VCF 9, there's a lot of opportunities for certification training that's actually free. So
yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind too, Pete, is that there are also service entitlements that are available, within different customer segments as part of this, and that we're also enabling a lot of our partners. We're really trying to drive this service enablement through our partners as a way to be able to do this, because we realize that a lot of our customers are at different stages of it. And speaking of, Pete, I think this is a great opportunity to insert that poll. So Anders, if you want to kind of throw the poll up there, I'd be very curious to see where our customers are at relative to some of the stages that Pete talked about earlier.
Absolutely. Let's get that up here. Hang on 2 seconds. All righty.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see. Let's see.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of these numbers.
What VMware technologies do you have deployed?
I got an idea in my head what this is going to look like, but I'm always love it when I'm pleasantly surprised.
I'm just curious. We've got about 300 people on the call, so I'm just kind of curious to where the audience falls within that. So let's run this for about another minute, and then we'll share the results as part of it. In the meantime, keep the questions coming. I do appreciate the questions on the Q&A. We're trying to keep up as best we can.
Very good. Very good.
We are over 50% participation. Let's see if we can make it 60.
Whoop.
Give you another 20 seconds here. I'll share these results out.
Nice.
59%. Come on. There we go. We're at 60%. All right. 10, 9, 8. All right. Let's end this poll here. And let's take a look at some of these results. vSphere, 119 out of 179 participated, 66%. vSphere plus NSX looking good. vSphere plus vSAN, vSphere plus ARIA, 41%, and VMware Cloud Foundation, 23%. None of the above. Got a couple none of the aboves. Well, hopefully the none of the aboves are inspired moving forward. So
yeah, good reason to be on this call for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So with that said, as Rick mentioned, we spoke to a lot of customers. There was a lot of great use cases out there. One of those was this company GCI. Now, GCI, Rick, you actually had a session with them, and I'm going to leave a link to that. But tell us a little bit before we start walking about their migration. Tell us a little bit about what their organization does.
Yeah, I mean, so they're the telecom provider within Alaska, right? And you think about Alaska and the diversity of, not only kind of where they are, just in terms of, you've got Anchorage and Juneau, and you've got these smaller locations that are highly concentrated, but they also service customers that are out, where sometimes they have to take a plane or, a snowmobile in order to get there, which is really cool as part of it. But, they have really been on the leading edge of this. They supported vSphere with NSX and ARIA in the early days, but what they were finding is that they continued to scale their digital footprint. It was just very difficult for them to scale and manage the environment. Things like patching and upgrades. It just really took them a lot of iterations, a lot of failures. And James, the director of their architecture team that was on stage with us last week, really said it was difficult to troubleshoot, right? They just had difficulty finding where that was. So they moved to 5.2 last year, right? When we went GA with 5.2, they moved to VCF 5.2, brought everything under VCF control. And right away, they were seeing results, right? Where before they were trying to do migrations, but they had to do a piece part a little bit at a time. They were able to migrate 5,000 VMs to VCF with a 99% success rate, very high success rate on it. And then once they built that underlying infrastructure, they were able to use kind of a self-service app deployment model where now, when new consumers, new development teams are coming on board, they can self-serve essentially and use the tools that come natively from VCF as part of that. They also did a big upgrade as part of this from NSXV to NSXT, from NSXT. To bring it under 5.2 as part of that. So now they have essentially a consistent network and security layer. And then it also gave them the flexibility to be able to move to a new identity access tool and integrate into a new CMDB. And because of the fact that they were VCF 9 beta customer, they were able to side-by-side test 5.2 and 9.0 as part of it. And some of the observations and feedback that we got from the beta program was amazing. They said, easiest install I've ever done. It's coming from a VCF customer. I guarantee you, especially those of you that have gone through the different upgrades from 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, some of those were painful. And again, so to hear that the install here was very simple as part of that. And then the day 2 operations was also great, right? They were able to leverage the direct log export to support so that they can integrate the support teams right away. Operations manager really kind of streamlines a lot of the patching that they did. And, this is the comment I've heard through a lot of our CTABs and other customer conversations is that, in the past, having to swivel chair across the different GUIs, whether I'm looking at SDC Manager, or looking at, ARIA operations, or looking at vCenter, the ability to consolidate everything everything into a single framework really helped out quite a lot.
Yeah, matter of fact, I was speaking to a couple of other customers as well about that install a comparison from previous versions of VCF to now going to from 5.2 to 9. Big difference. Like using the cloud installer, cloud builder from previous versions was a little painful. And it's certainly a little bit more complex. And the VCF installer is super light,
Yeah.
and the deployment is seamless. As a matter of fact, it was GCI that told us that once they did their installation, their users were not even aware of the turnover. So it was just a completely seamless upgrade. So there was zero outage for them during the process, and it was just uneventful in that. And tech should be boring, and in this case, it certainly was for them. So it was certainly a good story to hear from James and that team.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. So what's next, Rick?
So really, I mean, for those that are kind of evaluating and trying to figure out what your next step is, one of the best recommendations, that I've gotten from customers that have done this and certainly partners in our field teams is the value modeler, right? So we have a value modeler where we can sit down and be able to understand from you what are the kind of 5 or 6 things that you're trying to achieve from a business objective standpoint. We gather a little bit of information about your environment in terms of the application support, the traffic workloads, what do those look like? And then we can actually run a modeler against that. And what that modeler does is that actually comes back and provides a definition and a set of recommendations in terms of what that future state architecture looks like, where some of those cost savings can come down, because I know a lot of times it's a matter of convincing your boss or your boss's boss in order to make a transformation such as VCF. So we're providing the tools that essentially help you do that. We have a self-service or a custom assisted workshop that you can actually walk through to do that. If you're not familiar with this, I definitely recommend you ask your account team, your partner, or if you're working with the TAM, ask your TAM about this. They can absolutely map that through. And then as part of that, also map your journey, right? So your account teams are all now fully trained to be able to essentially have a conversation with you and make sure that's interactive, understanding what your business needs are, what are the objectives you're trying to achieve. And then as part of that, to be able to deploy, walk through this journey to be able to help you understand what it takes to be able to go forward. Obviously, anyone that couldn't attend Explore last week, we have all of the sessions out there. All you need is a login within the VMware Explore website, and you can go there. We added a link and a QR code here, take you right to it. If you don't have one, it's free to set up. Highly recommend you do so. And as I mentioned, we are coming back next year, so hopefully we see you in Vegas next year as part of this. Pete, I know there were a bunch of questions, some that we were able to answer, some that we have not been able to get to yet. So let's see. I'm just trying to pick off. Let's take a couple that we've answered already. Oh, VxRail. So this question comes up a lot of times. Is Dell VxRail supported with VCF 9? So we are actively working with Dell. There's work that they're doing on their side in order to support this. The commitment we have back from Dell is that they will first support greenfield deployments, and that'll essentially be a patch release off of 9.0. So it'll likely be our next patch release that is upcoming. And then brownfield upgrade. So let's say they have a VCF 5, they're deployed with VxRail on VCF 5 today. They want to be able to move to 9. That will be supported in a upcoming release, but it will not be the patch release. So there's a little more work that we need to do there. But just a general statement around Rail, because I mean, we've worked with Dell now for some time in terms of VxRail integration. And, the integration with the VxRail manager did provide some benefits, but it also created some challenges as part of that. So one of the things that we are doing as we look at our continued support for Rail is to be able to provide a way to be able to bring VxRail into the ecosystem, but without some of the limitations that existed before. So you're going to see actually a little bit of a relaxation on some of the very strict requirements that were placed upon that, to be able to essentially leverage your Rail investments and use that as a core platform within your underlying infrastructure, but not put some of the constraints that existed with Rail in the past. So you'll see some of these that are coming up there. Sandeep, you asked a question about Zerto. So we have not qualified Zerto yet as part of it. Haven't seen a lot of core requirements for it yet. Zerto's a great solution. I know a lot of people from Zerto. in the past. It's a great product, but your question is, how does it stand up to the live recovery capabilities? Obviously, what you get with VCF and VMware Live Recovery is much deeper integration, right? We can leverage the deep snapshots that vSAN provides as part of that, much tighter integration, much better visibility as part of it. So I would definitely recommend take a look at the cyber compliance SKU and VLR included within that when you're doing your comparisons against Rail, or against Zerto or some of the other solutions that are out there.
Yeah, Victoria Harris was asking, isn't NSX a requirement for VCF 9? Slightly yes, but no, but there is a requirement for the core installation for NSX for the management of it, but you actually can incorporate your own networking into your management domains. So,
yeah. Andreas asked the question about brownfield HPE distributed HCI environments. As far as I know, those have not been qualified yet on VCF 9.0, but I just took a note here to take a closer look at that. But as I understand it today, not supported within the current VCF 9.0 build. Let's see.
Vlad Bartran, is there integration between VCF and SRM, Site Recovery Manager? Yeah, so VMware Live Recovery, which is Site Recovery, now is actually fully supported with VCF.
Yeah, it comes as part of that SKU. So it's included within it. Publishing management domain be upgraded before deploying a DR instance. Those are a few other questions here. Any other questions that pop up, Pete, on your side?
There was a question there was a question earlier about support for VCF, sorry, for vSphere 7, which we talked about in the presentation, how it's going to be expiring in October. But then I saw another question about VCF, previous versions of VCF, like version 4. I was looking for the exact question, but when support ends for 4.
Right. So VCF 4, so that's driven by the vSphere release, which was vSphere 7. And that one's actually coming, right? So October 2025, I believe October 2nd, 2025 is when vSphere 7 goes end of general support. So that means VCF 4 will also go end of general support there too. So my recommendation is always check the support matrix in terms of when these products go out of support. One of the things that I will point out, though, is that within VCF 9, we are actually supporting a more frequent release model within VCF 9. So what you'll expect is that effectively we will have longer term support releases that give you about 2.5 years of support, and they're about 27 months of support. But within that time frame, you'll see another release out across there. There's actually a blog. I will source that blog. I'll throw the link in chat just in case anyone is interested on that. But yes, we have changed our support model to be able to allow longer support life cycle out across there. It ends up being about 6 years plus an extra year for support on the 9.x upgrade path as part of it.
Yeah, and Yasir asks, is it possible to have some clarification about VCF fleet? Is it an appliance or just a term of designing a group of VCF instances?
Yes.
So VCF operations and VCF automation. The term is a term fleet management, and those are the tools that you use. So it is not a specific licensing app for VCF fleet. It is just a term that is used for the management at scale. We're talking fleet management, and the best way to do that is through VCF operations and VCF automation.
Yep. And keep in mind that when you're thinking about fleets essentially become a group of instances, right? So I can have multiple locations where I have VCF fleets deployed out across there. Those fleets now, whereas before I had to manage each of those as each instance as an individual island, I can now bring these together as a fleet, and now I get a complete view of that fleet as part of that. Yep. I did find the blog, so I'll put this in chat as well. Any other questions, Pete?
I'm still scanning. Let's see. If you do a fresh install, can you move old data into VMware 9?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's all about. So it depends on where there's a couple ways to think about that. if you have an existing vSphere environment, you have all your configurations, all of your data within that vSphere environment, we can actually import that vSphere environment non-disruptively into a VCF 9 environment. So it's very easy to be able to do that migration. All of your data constructs, all of your management tools, all your configurations remain the same. And I have the ability to import all that data in non-disruptively as part of it. So we've been able to do this since 5.2. What we added in 9 is that now I can expand out to obviously vSAN environments as well, but also NSX environments. So I can support kind of those trickier configurations such as Struts clusters, and some of the other more complicated configurations are also supported. But we also do support the ability to import those NSX environments and then present that as part of a VCF deployment as well. And then I just dropped the blog in there. So anyone that's interested in the VCF 9 release cadence, take a look at the blog that we issued right after the release. That provides essentially a little more detail about what that release model looks like.
And I guess the last one is, Gabriel, we're running out of time here, but will ARIA Ops become the new vCenter to rule them all, moving almost all vCenter functions into ARIA? Well,
that's actually a great observation, because what's happened is if you look at the architecture of VCF 9, right, 9.0, what we did, we're using that operations framework as that core piece. But within that, we still have the SDDC manager functions for lifecycle management and for the infrastructure management. And then we also bring all the vCenter capabilities into that as well. Now, those that want to manage through vCenter, you still have that vCenter interface that you can use as part of that. But the whole idea was to be able to bring everything together underneath a single operations framework, so that now I have one console that I'm using to manage operations from day 0 all the way through day 2, which really simplifies the deployments.
Yep. That's good stuff. I know we're at the top of the hour. I think any questions that have not been answered, please email Rick Walsworth. call him on his personal phone.
I see how it is.
Yeah.
Number's 555.
Yeah, right. All right. Really appreciate your time. Thanks again for hosting this, Anders and Simon. Look forward to the next one.
Absolutely. And the next one will be out shortly. For those of you wondering, the recordings will be posted today on the webinar site, including the schedule of upcoming webinars, as well as a archive of former webinars. So if there was a webinar that you missed, or one that you want to pass on to a colleague, all of our recordings are stored there, as well as this one. So with that, thank you much, folks, and we're really looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.